They basically fall into under three heads: coercion, creation of artificial markets, formation of public research and development partnerships. It was obvious that these were not mutually exclusive, but the Strategic Planning Group focused its discussions particularly on PPPs, because we took the view, if there wasn't some R&D going on, then there was nothing for artificial markets to get their teeth into. And there were already quite a number of ideas gelling around on how this may be tackled. But I should point out to you that the artificial markets, at least you can argue, did eventually see the light of day, because very many features of what being discussed at that time got finally encapsulated into the Global Fund and the more recently the Affordable Medicines Facility for Malaria. And our good friends in MSF, who used to give us quite a hard time when I was still here in Geneva, in fact followed the coercion route, and paradoxically they were actually quite helpful to us, because it made all the other guys feel so bad that they decided they better help us do our PPP job. So what were these documents that were kicking around at the time? Basically, they were four. Jürgen Dreves, who was a senior manager in Roche, and his colleague had put something together. John Evans in the World Bank and some of his people had put something on paper. Myself and colleagues, I was here in Geneva by then in WHO TDR, had certainly written something, and Trevor Jones, who's sitting somewhere in the room, I've lost him, there he is, was then the Director General of the Association of British Pharmaceutical Industries. He put something together. And when we had a look at these various documents, there was clearly quite a large number of elements in common. So we thought that we could probably tease the best out of these and put something together. We found very early on there was some quite serious constraints that were going to limit how you could go about this. Perhaps quite interestingly, in some ways, bearing in mind how rude many of the public sector people were at that time about the industry, that they actually all recognised that the industry had to be involved, because you might love them, you might hate them, but they know how to do this stuff. It was also clear the industry at this stage were not in the business of putting their hand in the pocket for this activity, because they saw it as a public health issue. Everyone involved realised that whatever you ended up with had to be operating on an extremely competitive basis. There was no room for sleaze, and the pharmaceutical companies particularly worrying about antitrust legislation in the United States. And no one wanted to be engaged forever, so they wanted an easy exit mechanism. And I was very pleased to find no one bar one was prepared to go the institution route. No one wanted to see something built in bricks and mortar that sat there and did nothing for the next 100 years. We judged in our infinite wisdom and arrogance when we were young, perhaps, that none of these were insoluble problems. Surely to goodness we could get around these problems. But what we also recognised, it was actually going to be challenging not only to develop the idea, but actually to deliver the idea. And therefore, for that and for other perhaps good reasons, it was good to have a focus to this. And we decided to focus, therefore, initially on discovering and developing drugs for malaria. Why malaria? Well, this is the tropical disease with the highest impact on humans, whether you want to count the numbers in terms of disease burdens, that's DALYs for the professionals, deaths, clinical cases, or for the economists, impact on GDP. There were no effective vaccines for malaria. Current medicines, chloroquine included, as I indicated and you heard earlier, we're losing their efficacy. And DDT, so important to deal with this guy here that was transmitting the infection, was about to be banned. So what was the proposed solution? The proposal was to establish an independent, not-for-profit foundation with the mission of discovering and developing affordable, stress-affordable new medicines for malaria, to recruit a small management team to run it with operational freedom on a day-to-day basis, to raise money from the public sector and private foundations to create what was essentially a venture capital fund, and in parallel to use the good offices of the pharmaceutical industry to access important things like access to their chemical libraries, their key R&D facilities, gifts in kind, and above all else, their knowledge, experience and expertise of the process. The idea was to use resources raised this way to carry out a virtual R&D program. That's how you get away from having an institute. By funding adequately a series of discovery and research and discovery development projects, selecting such projects on a competitive basis using an expert scientific advisory committee drawn from the global scientific community in academia and in industry. Building each of these projects around a public-private partnership with no expectation of repayment. So for successful R&D projects, the cost of goods would be priced purely on the manufacturing cost plus, no need to recoup the vast R&D costs, particularly vast if you add in the cost of all the failures that surely there were going to be. And actively pursuing the intellectual property, not for the intrinsic value of that per se, but to ensure that its use could not be abused by others. And the final point to make, commercialisation was envisaged, again, not by MMV building and running a factory, but through the private sector partner or out-licensing the rights to another pharmaceutical company if they were not interested. Public sector approval essentially is obtained through the Director General's office in WHO, through the good offices of David Nabarro, who was the Director of Rollback Malaria at that time, and pharma approval essentially through the HEVA and DOLDA groups. HEVA group is R&D directors of the key pharmaceutical companies, and Trevor Jones, who's sitting just opposite me, undertook to get that one through, and the DOLDA group are CEOs of the pharmaceutical company, and that was looked after by Richard Sykes. The initial prime high priority objective for MMV, new medicines to treat falciparum malaria resistant to chloroquine and SP. So by the time we got to the end of 1999, in fact when MMV was created, formally created, MMV had actually been constituted with Louis's great help as an independent foundation under Swiss law. A board had been created out of the strategic planning group with Dame Bridget Ogilvie in the chair. CEO, Chief of Operations, Chief Financial Officer and CSO had all been appointed. An ESAC had been selected from the global scientific community with Simon Campbell in the chair. As has already been mentioned, foundation capital of $4 million had been raised courtesy of the bank, RBM, DFID UK and the Netherlands Ministry for Development and Cooperation. Business plan had been prepared with the help of the Boston Consulting Group, and the first call for proposals had been made. To our delight, we actually received 101 of those, far more than we were expecting, from 27 countries, and 31 of those involved pharmaceutical companies. So that was an auspicious start. 6 of those were recommended by ESAC during '99 under Simon's leadership for the initial portfolio.